Okay, looks like everyone has been able to join. Thank you so much for joining me and Chris today. We're going to talk about the recently approved Koala method with accounting for nature. So Chris is a former staff member of WWF who wrote this method in collaboration with Queensland Trust for Nature and with GreenCollar. And I'm not going to take up too much space today, so I'm handing over it to Chris.
Thanks, Amanda. I hope everyone can see my screen. Great to be here talking to you about this method, which took a while to put together with a group of us. So very much representing the collective effort today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm calling in from, the Turrbal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. As Amanda said, I've recently moved on from WWF. I'm now at Wollongong Conservation Society, setting up our woodland rewilding program. And excitingly, we're looking at applying this method in yet another place. So I'm really excited to be doing that. I think in putting together this presentation, I was reflecting on the process of method development. And this is the second method I've been involved in writing for accounting for nature. And I think over the last few years, I've noticed that it's become a much, it's still not a fast process, but it's certainly a quicker process than it was. And I think that's a real testament to everyone's efforts and trying to make accounting for nature reality. So I just thought I'd share that. So this method, as I said, was very much many hands make light work moment. So we had WWF Australia through Koalas Forever, Queensland Trust for Nature and GreenCollar, and the original basis for the method was actually developed as part of a land restoration fund pilot project. It's had a lot of people involved, and I think it's all the better for it. That said, it certainly isn't perfect. And the more people we can get using it, the better we can make it. And it's certainly something we always intended was to improve it over time. So if we dive into what the method actually is, the intention is to measure the utility of a given site for koalas. What's what I affectionately term koalariness. And now I think everybody on this call would acknowledge that koalariness is a very difficult thing to quantify. So our attempt is to measure and score two elements of what we believe are kind of defining elements of koala utility. So the first is component A, which is koala population. So that's the presence and activity of koalas on a site. And then we also considered koala habitat. So the context, extent and connectivity of the habitat, as well as any threats and the presence of key habitat attributes for koalas, so things like food trees and the structure of the forest on the site. We selected these two components because we wanted to understand how things are, but a really important part of the genesis for this method was coming out of restoration work and really looking at how we could improve sites over time to make them more useful to koalas, and how we could inform our future management practice based on the results on site. So we were trying to balance measuring a sufficient amount to inform those management decisions, but also not making it too onerous on people wanting to do that. So if we look at where the method can be used, we initially targeted it in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales and the Northern Rivers. And the method can be implemented within any single accounting area that's greater than 100 hectares. Or you can also look at aggregating multiple accounting areas that sum up to 100 hectares plus. And that can comprise multiple projects. It just has to be within a geographically defined area, like a sub-bioregional catchment. So there has to be a linkage there. The method's primarily being developed for those areas, but you could use it in other states and territories where suitable wild activity benchmarks are available or can be established following the methods in Phillips and Callahan. And we're intending as many people as possible to use this method. That's why we selected all 3 confidence levels when we put the method together. And the sampling efforts is designed to change based on what users want to get out of the method. So basically, a moderate level of confidence is a very simple account. It's kind of targeted to people without necessarily specialist ecological knowledge, and then it kind of ramps up through the confidence levels. High, very high. Very high is really targeting people with specialist ecological knowledge and who want to do a very relatively high confidence of information that they're collecting. So the method has 7 steps. Importantly, the first 3 steps are common to both components, and then the method diverges for steps 4, 5, 6, and 7 into component A and component B specific elements. Regardless of which components you consider, you don't have to do both. You can actually do, you could just do component A where you're looking at koala activity, or you could just do component B where you're looking at koala habitat. That's entirely possible because the method does generate 2 separate econs. But regardless of which components you consider, the first 3 steps are common. So I'm going to work through at a high level each of the steps in the method to give everybody a sense of how it works. And then we can go through some questions people have. So step 1 is all about making decisions for why and how you're going to use and develop your account. You need to think about the purpose, where you really think about it. Do you really need a very high, or would a moderate or high confidence be sufficient? You need to think about whether it's a one-off assessment or it could be something where you're measuring over time, and that will influence how you set up your account. The accounting area is really important. It's pretty much the first step, and it sets the geographical bounds of your account. Our view is, and again, this is coming from that restoration background, is that you really want to be thinking about how you can influence and manage a site to improve it for koalas. So there is an underlying assumption in this method that you are targeting these kind of conservation areas. I think that's important to acknowledge. So some examples of how you might consider your scoping is you might be working with a landholder to assess and improve koala habitat on their property. In this case, you would look at the bounds of what the landholder can influence realistically, and so we consider that something like the property boundary. Another example is you could be assessing the quality of koala habitat in a national park or state forest, and you've got some resources, and you can assess the entirety of the protected area. So the accounting area could actually be the full extent of that protected area with differing management zones within it, for example. And with those differing examples, the complexity of GIS that goes with it changes. So I think that's important as well to consider. We were quite conscious and took some lessons from Accounting for Nature's level 3 veg method on trying to make this accessible. So, there was some stuff we just couldn't pull out of it, but we tried to make it so that people could get into this with a relatively low barrier to entry. If we look at the confidence level, I think this is a helpful way to consider it. You've got, on one end, you've got a relative level of effort and accuracy that's low with a moderate confidence level, and then that progressively steps up as you move to high and very high in terms of effort and accuracy. I guess the high and moderate confidence level is probably best suited to non-experts because it's reliant on simplified ordinal scoring and photo point data collection, whereas the very high confidence level is sort of composite of elements from various published methods, so things like biocondition, the spot assessment technique protocol, as well as the biodiversity assessment method in New South Wales. So it kind of pulled on all of those things, so it is relatively intensive. And the reference benchmarks are also pretty important because they're looking at presence, occupancy, and activity based on preferred habitat trees. So you've got to have some good information that you're feeding into the spreadsheet. So I'll talk a bit more about that later. But the research that was informed this method is primarily available for coastal areas. So the certainty around activity and occupancy rates for dry systems could be less accurate. So that's why we've kind of kept it in the coastal areas that we have to be pretty confident in the outputs that they're having. And then if we look at step 2, that's where you get to compile the existing data. So it's all about reviewing what's out there. And for a moderate confidence method, you need to basically obtain a map that defines the boundaries of your accounting area. And that's likely to be a map that shows the property boundaries, including the areas. And then you just move on to step 3. That's pretty easy. For very high and high confidence, you've got to do a bit more work. You need to collate the relevant spatial layers and reports. So things like pre-clearing vegetation within the accounting area, the current vegetation class or status, so I'm talking about cleared, regrowth or remnant stuff within the accounting area. And you need to ensure that your data set differentiates the non-remnant component into regrowth and cleared. That's important. You also need to identify the vegetation community. So we need things like regional ecosystem or plant community type data. And you'll also need your food tree lists for koala populations. So that's coming from the Australia Koala Foundation list from Mitchell, or you can look at things like local knowledge and other peer-reviewed literature. You'll also need floristic descriptions and benchmarks for your vegetation types. And if they're not available, you need to work with the relevant veg mapping authorities to construct one. So you can see it's a bit more effort. Most of this information should be readily available. And we've got a list in the method in Appendix B of where you should start looking. But you can also talk to local land care, regional and groups and state and barrier or environment departments to try and get additional guidance if you need it. And a reminder, I'm sure lots of people on this call are all over it, but it's really important that you save your spatial data files in a way that's compatible with GIS, so shape files, and use a commonly applied datum. So I think that that can be difficult for new players in this mapping space. So if we look at what that actually looks like in terms of these property maps, on the top left, you've got a stratified area that is a moderate confidence. So that's just the whole property. It's one accounting area, one assessment unit. Super easy. If we look at high confidence, that's where we split by vegetation clearing history. So it's remnant, regrowth, or cleared, but you're not looking at the vegetation community types. And then for very high, that's when we introduce the vegetation typing as well. So then you're doing vegetation clearing history plus vegetation type. So that is really important, and that will give you all of your assessment units. And then it's your assessment unit sizes that determine the number of assessment sites. So the confidence drives the sampling effort all the way through the method. So you can see this is informed by, this is quite similar to what the survey effort in biocondition is, but it is a little bit different. And that was done through a process with the Science Accreditation Committee at AfN, as well as some of our experience testing the method out on various project sites. So the assessment unit area drives your assessment sites. And that you can see if you're doing a a moderate confidence method level on a 100 hectare site, you would be looking at 7 assessment sites within your polygon. But if they did a very high level, you could be looking at tens. I think that's really important. So it comes back to really understanding what the purpose of your account is. And I think you also need to consider that aggregation piece as well, because that will inform the number of assessment sites you do, because that's a really powerful piece of this method. Is you can, by aggregating, you can really reduce your survey effort where you've got a relatively homogeneous set of properties. For example, if you're doing multiple restoration sites within close proximity to each other, they're all being managed in a similar way. So you can look at how they're changing over time together. So once you've done your stratification, you are into step 4, which is where the method diverges. So you've got component A, which is koala habitat, and component B, which is, component A, which is koala activity, and component B, which is koala habitat. So for component A, you look at you use the spot assessment technique, and you can also apply rapid SAT in some situations. And you're looking at whether the koalas are present and what they're doing on site. And you are really looking for the proportion of trees at each site where koalas are recorded as present, either through observation or evidence of presence, things like koala scouts. We use SAT because it's widely accepted and it's accessible for land managers due to its relative cost effectiveness. And importantly, all confidence levels use the same protocol. So it's the one method, it's just applied at a different number of sites within an accounting area. So for component B, koala habitat, there are 3 indicators. So context, extent, and connectivity, habitat quality, and prevalence of threats. And if we look at the indicators and benchmarks for the 2 components, for component A, you can get your reference condition benchmarks for published data, or you can derive them independently from data collected on sites that are representative of the asset or sub-asset in undegraded state. So that's sort of like a reference condition, or you can do a combination of both. The location and sampling design for reference condition sites, we recommend that you seek guidance from government agencies and look at things like the biocondition manual for explanations on how to do that. For component B, for very high confidence accounts, you do actually need to set the reference condition benchmarks in the Excel workbook. For moderate and high, it's just ordinal scoring. So you don't have to worry about it. So it's pretty simple. And in terms of our reference condition benchmarking for component B, we've assumed the pre-colonial condition. You can adjust that if you want to, but you just have to justify why you've done that. So step 5 is where you actually get out and do the fun bit, where you do the field work. For component A, this involves completing SAT surveys of each assessment site, which is determined by your confidence level and your stratification. For component B, it's a little more complicated. Each confidence level has a different method. In general, very high involves application of the recognised ecological methods, sort of dam bioconditioning, you can expect that, as well as fauna cameras to identify pest animals. High confidence and moderate confidence use ordinal scoring and anecdotal observation. I'll give you an example of what a moderate and high-level account assessment site would look like. So it's a star packet in the centre with a 50-metre perimeter, and you have to take some photos of the landscape as well as canopy and ground cover, and then you use the 10-metre radius to assess things within that perimeter. And you're looking at evidence of pests, trees that are usable for koalas, average tree heights, recruitment, and the presence of non-native weeds. And you can see there, we've tried to balance the complexity of making those observations with gathering useful information to inform the way we manage the site. And if we compare that to what we're looking with a very high confidence level account, this is probably what ecologists here are much more familiar with. This is a typical biocondition plot, which we've carried through into this method. The 2 stars on the screen show the plots pieces that inform this method. We designed this method so that it could be done in tandem with the native vegetation account. So the idea being that for a very high confidence level account, you can collect the biocondition or native veg data, and then you can just select out the data you've collected in your 100 by 50 metre plot and your 100 metre transect and feed that into the spreadsheet. So that's that was done by design. That's why we carried that over. It doesn't mean if you are just doing the koala habitat method, you can just do the 100 by 50 metre plot and 100 metre transect and collect your data that way, but we're kind of hoping, encouraging people to be collecting that broader information, but it's not mandatory. And so within the 100 metre or 50 metre plot, you have to do the canopy cover, non-native shrub cover. You'll also have to do large trees. You'll need to do recruitment of dominant canopy species, and you'll also need to determine the koala food tree age class structure. So the great thing is, as I said, you can collect the data in a pretty standard way. It's how you interpret it when you're back in the office that's key, and the method talks through that in a lot of detail. So I'm not going to bore you with that now. And the final piece is pest animals. So you need to set up fauna cameras to collect images and evidence of non-native predators. I think the key thing to remember is if you have a large survey site, so one or more assessment units that are greater than 100 hectares, think big, you need at least one replicate, so 2 camera trap minimum per assessment unit. So step 6 is what I would say is less fun, is you go in and do your analysis and collation of all your field data, and then you calculate your indicator condition scores. There are separate calculations for components A and B, unsurprisingly. So for component A, your koala activity level at each assessment site is estimated as the percentage of trees with evidence of koala activity. Each koala activity level estimate at an assessment site is expressed as the percentage of the reference benchmark, and the percentage of reference benchmark is then converted into your indicator condition score using a continuous schema. So the indicator condition score is standardized against the reference benchmark on a scale of 0 to 100. So it's pretty simple, and this is all done in a spreadsheet. But, big shout out to Luke from GreenCollar who built that. For component B, indicator condition scores are calculated by comparing the raw data to a benchmark and then allocating an ordinal score in accordance with various criteria. The primary difference for those different confidence levels is that moderate and high directly estimate the ordinal score by observation. So that table that had the ranges in it, you use that, whereas for a very high level account, you collect the fine scale data and then that creates the ordinal score, similar as you would with the biodiversity assessment method or biocondition. I haven't included this one just to scare people, because who loves a really big table in PowerPoints, but I wanted to draw your attention to the decisions we made about weighting. So this is where we really diverge away from anything like biocondition and BAM. We've made some changes to the way you weight these different attributes based on what we think impacts koala utilisation of the site. So for the landscape factors, they're obviously really important for determining whether koalas are present on site. But the genesis of the method is all about how do you restore better. So a presumption is, well, restoring sites that are next to a highway, not the greatest idea, maybe. So we've downweighted our landscape values because you can't necessarily change some of those external factors. They're important, so we consider them, but what we really want to focus on is how we can change things over time. So we weighted food tree species and large trees higher because they are things that can be affected over time by management, and they're really important for koalas. Likewise for site level threats, so things like predators and weeds, we can do something about that. We know what we can do about it. So that's really important because you can actually change things. While for age structure and recruitment, they're important, but they're probably less critical than some of these other matters. So that's why we downgrade them a little bit. I guess the good thing about all of this is I just wanted to draw your attention to it. In the method, it's all done for you by spreadsheets. So Appendix H of the method lists all of the different scoring workbooks that have been built. They're really handy. Please use them because you can input your field data and the spreadsheets will do everything for you after that. And that brings you on to the final step of the method, which is step 7, which is where you will end up if you've done both components with an econ for koala population and another econ for koala habitat. So, in summary, this method is applicable for anyone who is interested in the koala-ness of a site, has a property that is at least 100 hectares, or can be part of an aggregate that is larger than 100 hectares. There are 2 econs that you get at the end. You can choose one or do both. The confidence level that is applied can be tailored based on the user's requirements and knowledge. It's a really key decision because it drives everything else in the method. So the big question is anyone using it? And I can quite happily say the answer is yes. WWF Australia is using it, GreenCollar is using it, and Queensland Trust for Nature are all using it. And Taronga is also planning to use it. And I'll take you through our experience at WWF applying this to our Koalas Forever program. So we applied it at a high confidence level for both components A and B. So that was across a total of 90 sites on 24 properties, and that spanned 230 kilometres of the east coast. And we surveyed them for koalas and the quality of their habitat. It went quite well, I would have to say, despite all of the rain. We managed to get to most of the places we wanted to. And the habitat quality for the koala varied considerably across sites, with landscape scale trends showing lower quality in regions with higher levels of deforestation and fragmentation. For example, West Ballina, really unsurprising. The signs of koala activity we found at 20% of sites in the Northern Rivers and 46% of sites in the Scenic Rim, so that's scats or actual koalas. Koala activity was moderate on average in the Northern Rivers and the Scenic Rim, with the highest activity rating actually in the Northern Rivers. Across all surveys, 2 koalas were sighted, 1 in the Scenic Rim and 1 in the Northern Rivers. And there was a weak trend showing higher quality habitat sites support higher activity of koalas. However, high quality habitat did not ensure koalas were present, and the site with the highest activity was only of moderate quality. The relationship between those 2 factors is complex, and obviously things like disturbance history are really important. And WWF will be repeating these surveys on a 5-yearly basis as the site restoration sites mature. And I believe the plan is to be making those publicly available over time, which is pretty cool. And here at Taronga, we're planning on applying this method as part of our box Montgomery Wildings program, which we're setting up. It's part of the koala strategy in New South Wales, and we're targeting to restore 5,000 hectares of habitat. So we'll be rolling the method out probably in the next couple of years, which is exciting. In terms of where to next, things like this, getting as many people aware of the method and rolling it out is really important. I believe WWF is starting to run some workshops, and we're just trying to encourage as many people as possible to use it. Over time, we want to refine the method as new information and new techniques become available, because anything we can do to sort of simplify the process and reduce sampling effort and make the calculations a bit easier, I think is really important to kind of drive uptake. So we'll see how we go. I am now very keen to answer any questions people have about the method, and thank you all for joining today.
Thank you so much, Chris. We have a few questions coming into the chat, but I wanted to let everyone know you can ask questions in the chat and we'll take them as we go, or if you want to, you can jump on with your microphone and ask a question in here. You can also do your little pop-up hand symbol so we know which person is waiting to ask a question. But Christopher, did you want to talk through your question, or do you want me to just read them out?
Oh no, I can talk them through. It's easier. I just didn't want to forget them. Yes, Chris, I am starting to use the method. I've started to build the account, and hence the following questions. The first one is, how hard and fast is the 100 hectare? The reason is I'm building it aligning with an LRF project area, which is 80 hectares. So not far from the 100. The property is 120, so I could easily add another 40 hectares, but the rest, that additional area is completely cleared. So it seems a bit pointless to just add, 40 hectares, a completely cleared area, just to meet the 100 hectare rule. So could I build it only on the 80 hectares?
I will answer that from the method development perspective, which is the 100 was vigorously discussed with the Science Accreditation Committee, and it was something that I think it's pretty hard and fast, but really that's a question for accounting for nature and whether they would consider it. I mean, I take your point. But
I think from our perspective, we might just have a conversation together with the SAC and the method authors and get back to you and see what they say. Really,
sure.
A lot of that will depend on how much it influenced, the confidence of the score that you're producing and how it aligns with other environmental accounts using the method. But something I also wanted to ask or say is that it depends on what your intentions are with the cleared land. So if that's just cleared and going to keep on being cleared, then really it's purpose to leave it out. But if you're considering restoring it, it might very well be worth considering including it into the account.
Exactly. No, that's actually a really good question. It's going to stay cleared. So that's why I was going, I can add 40 hectares, but this is not going to change ever. So yeah, okay, we can take that off. The other question was, and I'll speak fast, I'll leave space for other people, sorry. I did a biocondition assessment of that LRF area maybe 2-3 months ago. And can I reuse the data from that? 2 points on that. The first point is that I used the quadrats, and the high confidence in the Koala method has a slightly different method for ground cover. So can I use the quadrat for my ground that I did measure for the quadrat for the ground cover method under high confidence? And the second part of the question is, that was done 2 months ago. So there'll be a 2 month gap between my assessment of Koala foot trees and all the other indicators, especially ground cover and tree canopy.
How old? What age is this site? Is it recently planted, or is it what kind of?
Oh no, it's native vegetation has been there for 80 years. Sorry, I'm kidding. 25.
Excuse me. I think it would be. I think you'd have a case for reusing that data. I think as long as you demonstrated that it wasn't, there hadn't been sort of significant changes, fire or anything like that. I think you could justify that. I'll have to double check on the ground cover side of things. And
the ground cover is easy. It's just retaking a picture. That's
yeah. But I think that should be fine. My initial thought is that should be okay as long as it's in the same area. You make sure you're adjusting it for the equivalent area if you did it. I think that should be fine.
Okay, perfect.
And just sorry, I was just going to add, when you register and certify your account, as long as there's transparency surrounding that, so you include the description that there was a difference in timing between those two samples, that's what we need to have included in the information statement.
Okay, brilliant. Excellent, thank you very much. And last one quick piece of feedback, Chris, because you were saying the method will evolve. The only reason I'm not using high confidence is because of the predator activity. There's a very high bar. Suddenly, you need to set up cameras, etc. That's a significant barrier, I think, to the high confidence. Especially, yeah. Anyway, yeah. So that's the only reason why I didn't use it, or otherwise I would have used a high confidence.
Yeah, we included that. We talked about that a lot, and we thought it was because of the impact that pest animals can have on koalas. We thought it was important to include it. But I acknowledge that if people are just not using it because it's too hard, then maybe that is counterproductive. So, too resource intensive, or for whatever reason, that
exactly. It's more to
feeding, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not so much that it's difficult. It's you got to go there and you got to go back to that. You know what it is anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christoph.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I just was wondering, because you mentioned that there is koala habitat and koala population accounts. Like, in order to create an account, do you need to show habitat gain or vegetation gain, or can you just create an account based on conservation purposes, or just only for conservation purposes? So
you can create an account that sort of says that this is a point in time. This is our koala habitat econ and our koala population econ. You can do that. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't necessarily need to show gain, or for example, for a vegetation project, you need to show vegetation gain. In this case, you don't need to show gain, just conserve as piece of land.
Yeah,
is enough to create an account.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I might just add to that any method can be used that's available from Accounting for Nature without registering or certifying an environmental account for monitoring purposes. You just can't make any public claims unless you register and certify your account. And from our perspective, if you want to keep on being certified with Accounting for Nature, you need to measure the condition every 5 years to remain active. But yeah, it's up to you if that's something you would like to do or not.
And for the audits, I guess, are also 5 years, every 5 years?
Yeah, so that's the minimum criteria for Accounting for Nature, is to remeasure condition every 5 years. But there's no criteria on seeing, improvements over time or anything like that. So we don't have thresholds for how you need to change that environment during that period of time. It's just you measure condition ongoing every 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you.
Any other final questions before we wrap up for today? Hey, if not, if you do have any questions later on, please feel free to send an email to Accounting for Nature and we'll pass anything on to Chris. We'll also be sharing the recording for anyone who had to drop out a bit early who couldn't make it today. But Chris, thank you so much for joining us and talking us through the koala method.
Thank you, and thanks for all your support getting it through over the last little while. It's really exciting to have it out there. Please use it.
Great. Thank you so much, guys.